autobiography, memoir, fiction. 3 mirrors. Each one warps the light a little differently. If I write an autobiography, it's the facts, the timeline, the names. But facts don't always carry the weight of what I felt. Can a date capture a heartbreak? Can a location explain a transformation? Memoir, then. Memoir lets me choose the thread. I could follow the arc of love or loss, or the long road to grace. But what do I leave out? What do I protect? And who do I become when I curate my own truth?
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
And welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Rappahannock. My name is Diana Jameson, and today I will be your service leader. Whether you are joining us for the first time or have been part of our circle for many years, you are welcome here. You are just as you are. Oh, David, we have a thing. When we have a cognitive slippage, we ask forgiveness for the challenge.
You're going to run out of those.
Here we gather in spirit of curiosity, compassion, and community, bringing our questions, our stories, and our hopes for the world. Before we begin, if you haven't already, I invite you to silence your cell phone, settle into our sacred space, and be ready to listen, to wonder, and to connect. And when the service concludes, you are warmly invited to stay to speak further with our guest, David Cariens, to browse his books and literature, and to share in conversation with one another over food and drink. As we light this chalice this morning, may it remind us that our words, spoken, written, and lived, have the power to bring light into the world. May this small flame spark the stories we tell, the truths we share, and the connections we kindle here together. Writing can be a form of truth-telling, a way to understand ourselves, and sometimes a calling we simply cannot ignore. Mark Twain once said, "The difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and lightning bug." This morning, as we open our hearts and minds to the world of writing, may we listen not just for the facts, but for the meaning, not just for information, but for that spark of inspiration, that flash of lightning, or perhaps the lightning bug that lights the way forward. This morning's program is titled The World of Writing. Many of you already know David Cariens from the past visits here at UUFR and from his many contributions in our wider community. David is a retired CIA intelligence analyst who has written for the highest levels of government, and just as importantly, for everyday readers. He is the author of 9 books ranging from true crime and memoir to textbooks on intelligence and writing. His work has taken him from Eastern Europe to the BBC outside of London, and he's taught writing to everyone from new CIA analysts to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Beyond the impressive resume, David is someone who believes deeply in the power of words, to tell the truth, to preserve memory, and to spark change. And if you talk with him for more than 2 minutes, you'll also find he has a sharp wit and a storyteller's heart. Please join me in welcoming our friend and guest, David Cariens.
Well, I have to say, by the way, good morning. And
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to come here. And I really feel like I'm among good friends. The word, when I was asked to do a reading, I thought, well, am I supposed to get a book and find paragraphs and read, what is it? And so finally, and I just said, I have quotations from famous writers. And I sent to Marley and I said, here are some quotes on writing by Mark Twain. Would that be okay? And she said, great. So that the reading is quotes from Mark Twain. Yes, I think I picked a very good source. Write what you know. Write the subjects that you know. Many people don't really understand that. They go off in sort of I want to write on this. Well, if you're going to write on it, then you need to do some research and learn. Get the right word. How many of you have read something and you've thought, I want to read that sentence again because the words just capture it? It's hard work. Mark Twain was said, I notice that you use plain, simple language, short sentences and brief sentences. And he responded, yes, that is the way to write English. It's the modern way. I particularly like that, although I have a tendency in some of my writing, I have to go back over and drop the conjunctions, turn it into two sentences, all because I find about 12 lines later, I'm putting the period and no one will read the sentence. So keep that in mind. There are some books that refuse to be written. They stand their ground year after year and will not be persuaded. What he is saying is don't force the book or don't force whatever it is that you are writing. I tend to use that principle myself, and I intuitively know when I have a problem. And sometimes I'll turn to someone else and say, please brutalize this, because I could sit here for the next decade and I couldn't figure out what's wrong with it. So write what you know. And I love this, and I'm sure you've all heard it before, but it bears repeating, and perhaps it could be repeated in Washington, D.C. If you tell the truth, you do not have to remember anything. Okay, yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? One last thing that Twain said, which I think is correct. He said, I've never met a man or woman who didn't have an interesting story to tell. And I get this all the time as a writer. You know, people will say there is a book in me. I'm sure there is. And please try to write it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Thank you. And I would have some handouts that I'm going to give you. But first, and I want to read something to you before we delve into, take a quick look at the world and the mechanics of writing. Because when I was invited to come, I first thought of it in terms of the mechanics of writing, because that's what I teach. And I thought, no, this is a service. So what does writing mean? So I, at the last minute, sat down and wrote the following, which you will get a copy of. Writing is intimidating because it reveals so much about the writer. A writer bears to the world his or her knowledge of grammar, punctuation, spelling, logic, all sorts of things. You are really bearing your soul. If the writing is disoriented and confusing, the reader will think the author is disoriented and confusing. If the writer is not logical and does not make sense, the reader will not read it. Add to the above the fact that writing is the guardian of the heart and the soul of a person, a people, a religion, and a nation. Writers and other members of the arts community kept the torch of freedom alive and burning during the dark days of fascism and communism. They may be called to do so now. Those who ban books are not afraid of books. They are afraid of ideas. In this country, African Americans, poets and writers have helped expose the evils of racism and, by extension, the injustice inflicted upon people because of their sexuality, who they love, and their religion. As a political analyst at CIA, I dealt with communist Eastern Europe. I followed the underground world of the arts. Paintings that were banned, books that were written in secrecy and then published anonymously. I saw paintings and met artists who worked to keep the spirit of human decency alive, even at the cost of their personal safety. A painting hangs in my office by a Romanian artist named Vasile Pintea. It is called Constellation. I bought it when I was stationed in Belgrade because I liked the colors. I thought it was the universe, browns and yellows, shades of blue. I really couldn't afford it, but I bought it anyway, as I tend to do with so many things. Years later, my wife and I were sitting in the living room and it hung over our fireplace, and she looked at me and she said, "Do you know what that is?" I said, "No, what?" She said, "Those are eyes looking at you." And sure enough, I had missed it. I'm an analyst and I missed it. Okay. But that was the artist's way of dealing with the censorship and telling the world, the oppressive world that he lived in. That painting took on a whole new meaning for me. It is now, as far as I'm concerned, priceless. It was an artist crying out because the world he lived in was one where every move was watched, every word was overheard. In my own writing, I have attempted to combine art and the written word. I use the work of an artist friend of mine to capture the spirit of my 3 memoirs. For me, that painting, the one that hangs in my office, is worth a king's ransom. I look at it every day and it reminds me of the importance of writing and the importance of words. It reminds me of the importance of all of the arts to speak out for decency and to defend diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some last thoughts before I go into the actual mechanics of writing and some of the differences. If you want to write, make time to do it. Almost every time I come to do a book signing or a reading or something, you know, I feel I want to write a book, but I don't have time. You make time and you discipline yourself. Sit down and do it. Find an editor or a friend and ask that person to be brutally honest with you. That's exactly what I do. One of the reasons that some of my books don't make any money is because I hire an editor and they don't come cheap to go over it, because I would rather, that's even before I give it to the publisher, I would rather be embarrassed with that person rather than by the people who read the book. So to me, it's part of it. And you have to put your ego aside. Because as I said at the beginning of these remarks, you're revealing so much. When all of this is called to your attention, you're thinking, why didn't I see that? Why didn't I catch on to that? Why didn't I think to say it that way, to write it? Why didn't I find that word? But that's the world that we live in. When you write, finally, when you write, periodically get away from what you're drafting and clear your brain. I like to do that, get completely away from it, maybe go to a movie. I like to go swimming. So 2 or 3 days of not writing and then come back and look at the draft. You will be amazed at what you see. Several times I've thought, I can't believe I wrote that crap. And that's exactly what it is. So I start over. So you have to be honest with yourself to be a good writer. There's a gentleman, some of you may have seen me, my hangout is the Local. And I go there several times a week, spend a couple hours. That's where I do a lot of my writing. Because if I stay at home, I'm going to be asked, Dave, would you walk the dog? Can you open this can for me? I need something moved out of the garage, and it breaks my whole train of thought. So, and I've tried to tell my wife, I'm not trying to get away from you. It's just, I need time that's just for me to do this. So, and she, yeah. Well, let's not nitpick. Okay, all right. Now what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time talking about the mechanics and the world of writing. And on that note, that's for and I've got some for I think the other side of the room here. Okay. I'll give these over here. Writing is not all the same. When I used to teach writing on a regular basis, one of the things I would do, I taught intelligence, analytic writing. I would ask people, students in the class, to introduce themselves, and I would ask them, do you have any hobbies? What was I looking for? I was looking for someone who writes as a hobby. At CIA, I had a woman who had published 10 romance novels. I had several published poets. I had a young man who wrote several books on Christianity, and I believe I had a script writer. So my job was to tell them, you are very good at what you do, and you're published. Now you have to set all that aside. Because our form of writing relies on completely different parts of the English language, and it's going to be difficult for you. So I'm giving you a heads up now, right now. So with that, what I'd like to do, and I'm going to use the very strict form of intelligence writing that I used. I was not allowed to use adjectives, period. I was not allowed to use adverbs, maybe 1 or 2 occasionally, once a year. Okay. Now, why is that? Because in intelligence writing, it is extremely important that the reader not see the author, because it is factual. And what do adjectives and adverbs usually do? Yeah, emotion. Creative writers love them. So I'm having to tell my romance author, drop all the adjectives. Well, she practically had an apoplectic fit. Okay, and struggled and struggled and struggled. Okay, so that you could various other types of writing. I mean, if you're writing a school paper, a research paper, again, you're really going to go bare bones in the English language. because you're making an argument about something and you want to convince the reader. And the minute the reader sees your emotions in the writing, you've lost. All right. Then on the other end of it, fiction. Oh boy, here you've got a whole truckload of types of writing: romance novels, mystery writing, science fiction. All of these have particular idiosyncrasies to them. Each one of them is slightly different, not only in the subject matter, but also in the vocabulary that they pick. Biographies. Biographies, autobiographies, and memoirs. They all fit the same, it's under the same umbrella. And I had never really thought about writing an autobiography or a memoir, but my youngest son insisted. He wanted to know about my career with the CIA, and he just simply wouldn't let go. Every time I'd say him, "Dad, have you started on that yet? Have you started on it?" Well, he opened Pandora's box. That's what he did, because finally I gave in. And I said, "Richard, I'm going to do it." And then so I had to learn the differences between these. And they're very different. Okay? Biographies, I usually think of as being written by written about famous people in history. A lot of research, a lot of analysis. Okay? We're beginning to get in here a certain amount of creativity, but not a whole lot. It has to be factually correct. In fact, all three of these do. Autobiographies and memoirs are where you get more of creative nonfiction. Because then you, the individual, and let me add this. Remember I said you never want to see the author here? Boy, that's what you're doing. It's the author talking. So you see the author. So right there is a big change. Now, what is the difference between this and this? Usually a person will only write one autobiography, but you can write stories of others. Because memoirs deal with a particular aspect of your life, the story of a particular aspect of your life. Where an autobiography is you're doing what the biographer is doing, but you're talking about the whole life. If you want to zero in on particular aspects of your life, I urge you to do a series of memoirs, because that's what happened to me. When I sat down and started thinking about the project, I thought, wait a minute, I really have three messages I want to get across to the reader. If I fold all of those three messages into one volume, something's going to get lost. So I divided it into three. First one is called Escaping Madness, and it deals with growing up in the ideal American family in the 1940s, 50s, and into the early 60s, only to have it destroyed by my mother and brother's alcoholism and mental illness. And so it was factual. And the problem that you get when you're dealing with that sort of a memoir is you have to be honest. You're dealing with people that you love, but you have to tell the story as it is. And I will tell you, you do some soul searching. And how do you handle this? And the answer is you handle it very carefully, and you let the facts, as much as you can recall them, carry the argument. I mean, The creativity comes, and I remember how I felt when my mother would throw one of her screaming fits, but I can't remember what she said. So I recreate it to get the mood and my feelings into what I felt and what was going on. So this is where you're getting into creative nonfiction. So I wanted to write about that. Then a lot of my life, as some of you know, has been spent dealing with mass shootings. And boy, do I have a lot to say on that. So I've written 4 books on it. 4th one is a memoir in which I go back over some of the material and it goes even further. But I write it more from my personal reaction to what I saw happening. And that book has the thread of the dishonesty and the deceit and the lies that take place here in Virginia by people who we put our trust in, and they lie to us, and I document it. And I've been told I'll be sued. Well, I haven't been. But I think if I am sued, particularly on the Virginia Tech book, that will make national news. I'll have a bestseller. I'll use the money to pay the lawyer's fees. So I've got this all covered, guys, you know? Okay. And you can always think of a million reasons why not to do so, rather than a million reasons why should you do it. And that's one of the purposes of the memoir. I would think that some of you have a really interesting story to tell. As Mark Twain said, I never met a man or woman who didn't have a story to tell. So don't be intimidated by it. All right. Let me get my notes here because I don't want to miss anything. The biographies, memoirs. And then let's take a look at, you'll notice on your page, on your handout, the last page, are generally the 10 types of memoirs. There's the family memoir, and let me just tell you, these 10 types do not exist stovepipe. You're going to get a little bit of each one of them in your memoir. And all memoirs, I believe, have an aspect of a family memoir, because you're talking about yourself and probably the family that you interacted with. Okay? Then the spiritual guide. Those are very popular. Path to Enlightenment. That can be many, philosophical, whatever it might be. What I did and what I would do differently, memoirs. Coming of age memoirs. And one that's come to the fore in the last several decades, well, actually probably since around the 1970s, is the multicultural memoir. And I use the word culture in the broadest sense. I mean, my personal family is multicultural. We have 3 sons. One is we adopted from Korea. One of my sons married a Bangladeshi. So I tell people that when we get together, we pray to whom it may concern. I've said that a few times and people have really gotten annoyed with me. That's the tough rocks, okay? Travel memoirs, very popular. People love those. You go on vacation, travel memoir, people love to pick up something like that. Near-death memoirs. Oh my God. Memoirs. Something happens completely out of the blue that stops you dead in your tracks and changes your life. So and those are just 10 categories. I'm sure if I were talking to an English professor some way, say, oh, Dave, you've missed the other 100 categories. But again, I was teaching a class, a memoir writing workshop. I don't know, this was the class because it was over multi-days, and one of the participants got very upset. She said, I can't make up my mind which one to write. Set that aside. Just sit down and start writing. Think about what messages you want to get across. Write some essays. Don't worry about the categories. That everything will come into focus as you write these essays. It's amazing. It happened to me. Things that I never thought I'd forget, and I had forgotten. And then all of a sudden I wake up in the middle of the night and say, you know, I'm talking about growing up in this family, and I never mentioned the fact that I was a severe asthmatic and the impact that had that. So I had to go back and rewrite all of that. That was a big part of my childhood, but I completely somehow missed it in writing. Scripts. I will tell you right off the bat, I know nothing about scripts. And one of my books, I've had 2 or 3 people say, Dave, you have got to turn that into a script and market. I can't do that. You need to be trained to do a script writer. Look what a script writer does. It's not just a dialogue. You're imagining the setting. You're imagining, you have to put the words in to make sure that the actor gives it the proper emphasis. I mean, there are a lot of considerations that come in to writing that I've never had to consider. I would love to try it sometime, and I may. Poetry. Now, again, I'm not a poet. My wife loves poetry. Whenever I go any place, I always bring her back a book of poetry. I've read The Wasteland, Evangeline, all of those things. But Evangeline I really liked. But I write prose, and my main calling is there. I do appreciate poems. I particularly appreciate naughty limericks. Something from the Middle Ages, those are always fun. Then there's legal writing. And legal writing for me is very, very interesting. I said intelligence writing is highly disciplined. So is legal writing. But legal writing is stuck in history. That's why you can't understand a lot. Now, something else about legal writing that I found, I'm by training, by academic training, I'm a German-Polish historian. And so I love history. And I found out that scholars in Great Britain use legal writing for historical analysis. If you stop to think, when the Normans conquered in 1066, they superimposed French on the conquered people. And until about the time of Henry VIII, if you went to university, you studied in French or Latin, because what was then English was considered not a worthy language. It was the language of the masses, certainly not fit for the nobility. Well, all of a sudden, the nobles get more power. Well, where did they institute their power? In the laws. So my wife and I recently went to the lawyer and had our will and testament drawn up. The phenomenon of the double noun. Testament is French for will. So when the double nouns begin to appear as you read through these historical legal documents, historians use that to measure the growth of the nobility versus the monarchy. So there are all sorts of fascinating little tidbits about writing and how each one has its different characteristics. Legal writing requires the Oxford comma. So does intelligence writing, not creative writing. They're going to tell you to take it out. When I was in freshman composition at university, I'd put the comma in and the instructor would always take it out. But there's a legal reason for having that comma in. It indicates that all 3 or more parts are of equal value. So in the law, that has a real meaning. So those are really the basic types, and I want to have some time for some questions and conversation, but I would like to leave you with just a few thoughts. One, if you decide to write, and if you are a writer, everything you write can be improved. So with that note, remember, it is editing, not correcting. There are two basic types of editing. There's the line editor and the content editor. Sometimes you will, for a period of time when I first started writing, I was lucky enough to have a woman, she lived in Reedville, and I hired her, and she was, without a doubt, the best line editor and content editor that I'd had. And but unfortunately, she moved to Tennessee on to greener pastures, and so I always have to have one of each. If you want to write, just set the time aside. Just force yourself. Brainstorm. Don't worry about spelling, punctuation. Get the ideas on the paper. There's plenty of time in the writing process to bring structure and meaning to the ideas. You need those ideas. And as I said, finally, as a reminder, please do not let your ego get in the way, because I can tell you, having written now since 1967, my ego is long gone. I will tell you right now. And I get with even with some of you may have noticed that I write some letters to the editor. I even have someone proof those. And sure enough, they'll say, Dave, you need some sort of a transition here. What do you mean by this? It doesn't make sense to me. But you see, because you're the writer, makes perfect sense to you. You don't need a transition because you're just transitioning right through, because you know the substance and you know what you want to say. Okay, on that note, do we have time for a few questions? Okay.
Among us. Well, what a great talk. I really appreciated it. And I was thinking of you this morning because I got the interior of my latest book and to go over, and I had just read the second memoir volume of yours, the one that's about the shooting stuff. And I, as you warned me, caught that there were a number of errors that you said people had already caught. And these are not content errors. They were basically font errors.
Right.
Where like an OH came out as a weird U with an accent over it and things like that. But I am running through the same thing. So you gave me a little extra patience with that process. You know, I noticed I had, you know, I explained to them that two pound signs means skip 2 lines. You don't really need to leave the pound signs in. And and they deleted the beginning of it. Like, okay, I've got to find the original, find out what in the world they deleted, and when it ends at the end of a pair.
Yes.
Yeah, all of that just housekeeping stuff about the interior of a book is a real pain.
I've had them drop a whole page.
So you have to read it. You can't just trust that they are doing.
Yes, I know.
the right thing.
You know, when you're writing, the one thing I didn't mention, particularly if you're a writer, you publish books, you really beat your brains out. It's exhausting. Mental work is exhausting. And then comes the publication process and the back and forth, and you finally think, just publish it. Because I can't look at this thing one more time. But there is a gremlin someplace that no matter what you publish, when you get the copies of your published book, you're just going to say, I'm going to open up, just look at it, and there it is. this error will jump out at you. And you've read it, you feel like the Char Force has read it, you feel like everybody's read it. Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you for the talk. My question was about letters to the editor because you didn't mention it in your form. So I'm glad you did mention it because that's something that I always have in my head. And I wonder what good does it do? And I always think, is this going to be helpful or is it going to be hurtful? And it's supposed to be persuasive, but sometimes you read them and they're just a rant.
Yes.
So I don't want to fall into that. So it's getting harder and harder to write anything.
Yes.
Because I don't want to be like, read it later and go, oh, why did I even bother?
That's exactly why I have someone edit my letters to the editor. And frankly, I get so upset about what's going on. I can get over into a rant pretty quick, you know. And my wife in particular is the one who says, you're going to lose the reader if you take that out. And I said, oh, but I love that. I thought that was, I think the answer, do the letters make a difference? And my answer is yes, they do. And let me give you a little evidence of that. We moved here in 1997 at a time when you were a Democrat. You had to say it, hush, hush, Democrat. We lived in Northumberland County at the time. The Democratic Party held no meetings. So I came to the Lancaster County Democrats and they held their meeting and it usually consisted of 3 people. My wife was sure, because all of a sudden I just started writing off the get-go, and my wife was sure I was going to get shot mowing the lawn. And now, let's fast forward to 2024 and 2025. I've been on a regular writing kick because it helps me deal with what's going on. For the first time in my life, I had a woman come up to me in Walmart and say, thank you for your letters. We need to hear the truth. I read them. I was at a fellow author had a signing in Urbana, and a man sitting next to me saw my name, it's on the name tag, and he said, oh, I always look for your letters. There's this whole question about young people. I'll go back to my haunt, the local. And I've ordered my latte and I'm ready to write the whole thing. And the young man comes up and sets it down and he leans over and he says, thank you very much for your letter on DEI. I do not get a comment every week, but I would say at least every 2 weeks, I get feedback from people I was sure who were MAGA types. I think there is a hunger out there for the facts and the truth. So to get to your point, I don't always succeed, but I try to make my letters factual so that someone can look them up. And I got that from the man in Urbana, as they said, what I like about your letters is I can always check it and verify if what you're saying is correct. And that's important because I like to think that the rants are coming from the other side, which I think they are. They very rarely, their source is Doge. Give me a break. That's not a source. Those are people who are destroying this government because they have an agenda. That's not an objective source. So, I don't always, there are many ways you can write a letter. Some is to raise a question in the title and then use the letter to answer the question. When Winston Sears was supposed to talk over at Piankatank, I wrote a letter and got it in 5 newspapers that said, would someone please ask Winston Sears these questions? So I listed 5 questions. Why did you, in the wake of Uvalde massacre, in weeks of that, when the Texas governor and Senator Cronin, am I get that right? No, Cornyn, yeah. Canceled their appearance at the NRA convention in Dallas out of respect. And you went ahead and gave a rousing speech about weapons. Why did you insult those families whose children have just been killed? She did exactly the same thing with the families from the Virginia Beach shooting. And so I had that as a question. Anyway, now I don't know whether the letter did any good or not, but the next thing I saw, she had canceled her appearance here because of a conflict in schedule. So, you know, I'm not going to take credit for it, but I think I might have had just this much because she wasn't sure what she was walking into and she couldn't answer them. So I can only say from the perspective of being here 28 years that it's now like it's day and night. That people are responding to the Democrats' letters. And I've heard this from others because I'm on the executive committee of the Lancaster Democrats. And so obviously we have discussed such things as letter writing. And people have said, I'm getting feedback. Positive. For the first decade I lived here, it was all negative feedback. Okay, anything else?
Yes. You on this side of the river and Earl Simpson on the other side of the river are my heroes for exactly the reasons you just laid out. You all put it out there, you call it what it is. Mike Nez is right behind, but you guys are consistently out there telling the truth in such an incredibly interesting way. But that was not my question,
Okay.
but thank you for that.
Well, listen, my pleasure.
I'm sitting here listening to your conversation about stories, and I'm thinking how many stories we have in this room right here. And I would be interested, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but it would be really interesting to know how many people have ever started their own book and put it aside for some reason. I did. I had a tree fall on my tent when I was in the middle of a kid's book. And I'm like, okay, the universe, I'd set a tent up in the backyard and it was my office and I'm out there every day. And I'm realizing for the first time what it feels like to have your characters just carry you away because I had no idea where they would go. And then a tree missed my head. A big tree limb missed my head by about 3 or 4 inches. And I thought, I can't come back out here and I have nowhere else to write. So that's done. I'm not supposed to do this, but I may go back to it now that I've listened to you.
There are other tables at the local.
That was years ago when I had young grandchildren and I was kind of doing memoirs through them. So, and you know, if you've got a book that's sitting on the shelf, pull it back out.
Absolutely. This gentleman over here.
Thank you very much. It's interesting. I would like to make 2 comments. One is letters to the editor.
Yeah.
I think are important. I write a number myself, and I've had people come up to me and say, thank you for your letter. 2 things about it. One is, as my wife will tell you, it's about a 3-day effort for me to write a letter because you got to limit it to 300 words.
Yes.
You know, and it's like Churchill once said, you know, somebody asked him how long it would take for a 5-minute speech to prepare. And he said 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And they said, how about for a 10-minute? He said, oh, about a week.
Yeah.
How about for 2 hours? He said, I'm ready right now.
Yeah.
You know, if you got to be concise, you have to get it there.
That's exactly right.
The other thing I would say, I would take a little bit of exception on your nonfiction with adjectives and adverbs.
Yeah.
I would think Barbara Tuchman and Ambrose and a few of the other writers would take some exception on that.
Yeah.
You got to set the stage.
Yeah.
Depends on what you're writing and
Yeah.
what the purpose of that writing is.
Yeah.
You know, there's a guy named Brand, I think it is, who writes popular nonfiction. And I like his writing, but he has no footnotes. And so I never know what to believe on him.
Yeah.
His prose writing is excellent, but are the facts and the history there?
Yeah.
So I think you have to make a little distinction.
Yeah, you're right. This was just sort of a superficial look, but your point's well taken.
Okay, this will be our last question.
Well, we know that the letters to the editor page is the next most read page in the newspaper besides the obituaries.
And I've stopped reading that because most of the
This will
people
be our
that
last
are
question.
on there are younger than I am. So therefore I find it depressing. All right.
They tell me this is the last word, so I'll be brief.
Okay.
If you want to write something, print it on quality paper with a color that's slightly different so it can stand out in the stack, and people will keep it because it's heavy paper and read it again and again.
Yeah. That's interesting. You used to say that when I was teaching intelligence and crime analysis. Every day the students wrote for me. And I always had a school solution. And the school solution was not something that I wrote. It was something that other students had written, which was really darn good. For every exercise, I used the school solution. I printed it on a different color paper. And I got reactions to that. Thank you for doing that, because I might want to go and refer to, oh, exercise 2 was on blue paper. That's what, it was just, I tend to be anal retentive, so. All right, thank you.
Well, thank you, David, so much.